Over the past few weeks, we have been talking about and learning about some of the ways that evaluation can promote and perpetuate racism and inequality. Today, we're going to talk about some of the things that we've learned and some of the actions that we're going to start taking in our own work to make our evaluations more equitable.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peta Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
Good morning. I'm Peta Blakely, founder and principal of Blakely Consulting. Over the past few weeks, we've been talking about program evaluation, and particularly how program evaluation might be perpetuating inequality. We've met with leaders who are working to undo the ways that their evaluation efforts might perpetuate racism and injustice. And we've talked to leaders and researchers who are inventing new approaches to evaluation. Today, we're going to talk about some of what we've learned from those conversations. What is evaluation? And how might we be inadvertently undoing our own good work in the ways that we measure our work? If you are joining us, please let us know in the comments how you might adjust your work based on what you've learned. I'm joined today by my colleague, Cynthia. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Peta. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good.
So it's been a busy few weeks and we've learned a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
So much of it was new to me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. What was the most surprising thing to you?
Well, I'll start with what I thought in terms of evaluation before we launched the series.
Yeah.
I always felt like evaluators were good-willed, right? Naturally. I mean, we're evaluators, right. And our intent is always to show impact so that programs continue to get funding, so that programs that are working well get recognized and they can get replicated. So I always felt like we had our hearts in the right place. And what I learned these 4 weeks is that we could and are doing harm. And we can no longer be oblivious to the harm that we could potentially be doing to those that we think we are helping. And so,
well, I guess that's how structural racism works, right?
Yeah.
You're not actively undoing it, you are doing it, right?
Yes. But for some reason, I just thought the world of evaluation just didn't need anything because I thought it was intended to be for the good of all.
And it's funny because I got into evaluation because I thought that we as practitioners, because back then I was a practitioner, weren't holding ourselves accountable, right, to solving the problems that we said we were going to solve. And that was an ethical problem and that was perpetuating inequality. And then I went from being in the field of education to being in the world of policy because I was concerned about how programs problematize low-income people and families, right? Yeah. And the big question to me at that time was, when we're looking at poverty, why do we look at poor people, right? Why is workforce development training always training the unemployed or the underemployed or the marginalized to fit into the workforce? Why are we never training the workforce to embrace more diverse workers? But I never quite put that together that like in our day-to-day work, we are still evaluating those programs that problematize the marginalized people, right? Yeah. So therefore our evaluation starts out in that problematic place.
Yeah. And what I've learned these 4 weeks is that, undoing racism is tough work. Right. And it's a journey, right? I don't see a destination in our lifetime.
Yeah.
It would be nice. So I'm letting the universe know that would be nice, right? But I see it as a journey. And so what I've also learned is that when you're open to learning, it is not as daunting as it feels, right? Like the learnings I took away with these past couple of weeks are like, oh, this is not hard. It's not that hard. We
Right.
can do this. Like we can,
I had a yoga instructor at one point who used to say, it's not complicated, but it's not easy. Right?
yeah, I can see that.
Right. Like, you know, tree pose. It's not complicated,
Yeah,
but that does not mean it's going to be easy. And I think that's
yeah.
a really helpful distinction here. Like, not everything that we've looked at is very complicated, although some of it is complicated.
Mhm.
It is not intellectually or personally or emotionally easy, right? It
Yeah,
requires, and what you see, like, I think this is one of the other interesting things is I cannot tell you what to do, right? I can't say like, oh, this approach is better than that approach because it's not in the product, it's in the background, right? It's in the reasoning and the conversations and the discussions, right?
yeah. And that the learning happens from bringing people together,
Right.
which was
Yeah.
another takeaway. Like everyone who we spoke with talked
Yeah.
about bringing people together and
Yeah.
having
Yeah. And
conversations.
Makiba talked about how challenging it was, how they brought everybody together and then had to take a break from the work,
Yeah,
right?
which I thought
And
was wonderful.
it was so interesting. And one of the things that I really noticed in her deck was weaponized fatigue, which I think is fascinating. You know what I think about work and overwork,
Right. Oh,
right?
yes,
And
yes.
expectations of
Now,
fatigue, right? But like one of the ways that racism is perpetuated is weaponized fatigue. So I thought it was so interesting that they're embodying this in their process by saying like, it's okay. We've been doing hard things and we are going to take breaks and
yeah,
let this process take as long as it takes because we're not like wearing fatigue as valor. I thought that was
yeah.
so interesting and so layered. Yeah.
And it's funny when you first said the term, I was like, God, you don't hear those two words together often,
No.
but it's so true. And we know that part of the oppressive systems is to I'm losing my train of thought. Come on, son. Is this haste and
Right.
the rushing through
Right.
things,
Yes.
which is where mistakes
Manufactured
happen,
urgency. Yeah.
where we miss things, where we overlook things. And I
Right.
loved in her approach where she said, you know what? Let's take a break.
Yeah.
And I could appreciate that because
Yeah.
we still embark in projects where there is a race to the end, a rush. And
I mean,
it's
what a conflict, right? I mean, as a consultant, I have to race and rush. If I don't finish, I don't get paid,
right.
right? So,
Yeah.
there is this pressure. It's built into the system, but like it serves, right? It serves the inequality. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I really appreciated that. But also Nina talked about the same thing. Like she's worked with foundations, and when she learned that the term stakeholder is not
Yeah.
a good term, and she
Mhm.
broke it down and she
Yep.
engaged people in conversation, I was blown away. And I love her
Yeah.
term, an ecosystem of actors is what she
Yeah.
called it,
Yeah.
and as opposed to stakeholders. And I thought, wow,
Right.
that's really cool. Like
Yeah.
we could do that, right? We could
Right.
do that.
Yeah. Right. There is a small thing. It's small and very actionable, right? But it really changes the way you think about these actors,
Right.
right? Now they are, right, they are active. They have agendas, right?
Yep.
They have, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that she talked about that I thought was really helpful was just being transparent that we're all figuring this out in real time.
Yes.
She
Yes.
said, oh, we just tell our clients like, hey, this is our thinking and this is why we're trying this new kind of awkward and uncomfortable thing and we're going to try it together. Right.
Yes.
And that's going to be the process. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all going to feel very, um, it's all going to feel very uncomfortable and take us out of our lanes of expertise. Yeah.
And this is where grace comes in, right? Is that
Mhm.
when you approach the work of deconstructing racism from a cultural humility
Yep.
standpoint, where you are open to making mistakes, where
Mhm.
you're compassionate and you learn together and you're able to process it,
Yeah.
a lot happens toward the end to you are reaching your goal. When there's conflict and there's finger pointing and there's pain that comes from all different places and gets put in the center of the table, it's hard. It's
Yeah.
very, very hard. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I was really struck with when Evan and Diana were talking about include, I was about to say the S word, including some of their ecosystem actors, um, to make sure that they understood what questions those actors were going to answer with their data,
Yeah.
right? And to understand how they saw needs for different populations within that data set and what they were going to do with the information, right? Um, so if you just saw their report and you saw, various kinds of disaggregation, it might not be obvious, right? It probably wouldn't be obvious how much work went on in the background to decide that like these were the best ways to present this data.
Yeah. And for them, my learning or my takeaway was they kept it was about the work,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes there's a place for that because when you bring people from all over, right? And we always have, well, many times we have our own personal agenda, but
Right.
keeping clear on the mission and the work also helps to focus the group to get the work done. And I had a deep appreciation for that. Their work is not easy. Having a
Yeah.
whole bunch of actors at the
Yeah.
table that are deciding what questions to ask, and some of it is interesting, and some of it you want
Yep.
to keep the way it's asked because you can then benchmark it, or you also have people's personal values. And this
Mhm.
is that survey, which name I forget right now, but it's like 110 questions.
YRBS, Youth Risk Behavior Survey, something like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep.
And it's a huge survey, and
Mhm.
they are choosing to adapt it. And you have strong opinions. You have strong
Right.
opinions. But I tell you something, we know what we know about our young people because of data like this.
Right.
And so it's important. And their work is not easy. It's
No.
not an easy job.
No, that's incredibly challenging. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the
And then you add that on
commitment,
top of when we're going to ask these really sensitive questions in a public school setting. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, it's so hard. So these evaluators are changing the world, right? I mean, the
Right.
world of evaluation. Well, they're also changing the world
Yeah.
because in when we change how we think, we change how we speak, we change how we act. That's where change
Right.
happens. And so we do have another group coming up
Yep.
in a week, I think, and they are looking at evaluation through the eyes or lens of Indigenous people.
Yep. Right.
That is going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, there's a group for whom, right? The entire approach needs to be turned on its head, right?
yeah.
The priority of how do we create evaluation that answers the questions that we want to answer, right? That are important to us in this community.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember a long time ago when Ron Dorsey came on the show, and he said essentially evaluation is evaluation, it was developed in the context of philanthropy, and philanthropy does not exist to destroy the systems, right, that created it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, and we talked about it where philanthropy, this hierarchy of power and money and wealth and, you know, the underserved, almost like, well, we'll give you money, but you have to prove to us
Right.
that your life is better. And if it's not, then we're going to take that money and go someplace else. And so,
Right. Or that your life is more the way we wanted it to be. Like you said,
yeah,
necessarily better by your measures.
yeah.
Yeah.
And come on, we know that a 20, 30, 40, $50,000 grant doesn't change anybody's life. And so
Yep.
it's a lot of pressure on the
Yeah.
individual and on the nonprofit without putting pressure on the investor. Right. So if
Right.
you're going to invest, then invest. You know, do you have you heard of Jeffrey Canada?
Yes.
He used to be the head of the Harlem Children's Home.
Yep.
And there's a lot of, you know, controversy, not bad, but people talk about whether this was the right approach. But when he started, he went to funders and told them, this is in the beginning of him starting to build the empire that he did, that if you did not commit to his organization for 3 years, a minimum of 3 years, he didn't want your money. And that is a wonderful approach. The reason,
and we've got to remember, this was like, what, 20 years ago?
Yeah.
More than that?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's very recent that now funders are just giving people 2 years of money.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Partly because they learned, like at that time, everything was 1 year of funding. And so many grantees would say, you know, which was enough time to like do the cycle once, right? And the grantees would say, we've just figured it out. Like, we've almost worked out all of the kinks.
I know.
And now it's over, right?
Yeah.
So what he was doing at the time, just saying like, give us 3 years of money right now, was super unusual, right?
Yes. Yeah. Now, people criticized him because he had the backing of a lot of big names, and he a lot of his board members were from Amex, and I think he came from American Express, and there was all of that, and that there was also that there was power already embedded in him in terms of his network. But I thought the approach was a really good one and really innovative at that time. He also hired people for the first, I think it was 6 months, it could be a year, to think. And he would tell them, I am hiring you to think. And that's another thing that we don't get time to do. I have gotten grants literally on September 30th to start October 1st. Now, you all know that the federal government fiscal year starts October 1st. So you know who I'm talking about. Not fun. There's no planning, you know. Every once in a while, you get a smart funder that says, take some time to plan.
I talked to somebody recently who said they have been carving out little bits of money for these like capacity building grants. He said organizations will apply to them for funding, and they really want to get Black and brown led organizations and organizations that are led by people with lived experience of the problem area that they work on to be funded. But the funding has always kind of gone to the same handful of people, right? Who get very sophisticated and get very good at getting these grants, right? And these smaller not-for-profits apply and they don't get the money. And what would happen in a lot of cases is they say, well, that was not a good use of our time, and they stop applying.
Right.
Well, what he's been doing is taking little bits of their money and giving those organizations detailed feedback, and then these little like build your capacity grants to support them to apply again in a year.
Wow.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And of course,
That's an investment.
yeah, right. They had to do it like a little bit outside the lines, which is why I obviously can't name the organizations or anything. Um, and he has feelings about this too. Um, but what you have to be like really creative and innovative
Yeah.
to deliberately be growing the field in this way.
Yes.
Right.
And daring.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And be judged sometimes,
Yeah.
or lashed out at. I
Yeah.
In the past 2 weeks, I've spoken to 2 executive directors recently. Yeah. I mean, I know a third one, but where their board members
Oops.
very conservative age group, and they're not willing to change or do anything because they don't think they're doing anything wrong.
Right. They're not. They're doing everything the way everybody's always been told to do it.
Yeah. And so the EDs are younger, and they have a lot of innovation ahead of them, and they have a lot of thoughts, and yet they receive a lot of resistance. And so this is a problem and a power dynamic that happens and is very real in our nonprofit organizations.
Yeah.
That they're also going through. So it's tough. It's really tough. So when you hear an ED like a Jeffrey Canada or someone else who I can't think of right now that's well known, that's doing something innovative, right?
Mhm.
We should pause before we criticize,
Right.
and think about how hard that was.
Right.
Because it is hard to get people to change. And although he had the backing of many executives at Amex, guess what? They're conservative, and they're also part of the hierarchy, and they just as well could have said no.
Right.
And they didn't. And so look at what he built. So I think that we can all learn from listening.
And this is, once again, the promise of the post 2020 era, right?
Yeah.
There are a few really great things that came out of the summer of 2020, right? Out of the pandemic and the protests that followed the murder of George Floyd. One was, I remember this being the time that we started this show, and Cynthia, you said, "Oh, everyone is so forgiving right now," right? Like nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Everything is up in the air, and people are much more open. And that has created, I think that has stayed part of the culture, right?
Yeah.
And that has created this opportunity to experiment and do things in different ways, right? And then you take on top of that a much more rigorous national conversation about equity and social justice, and an acknowledgement that it is going to be slow and uncomfortable, right? And it's going to look awkward, and it's going to look a little less professional, right? And things are going to be not as streamlined and not as efficient, and all of these, these values of professionalism that serve to reinforce white supremacy, right? But there's a much higher tolerance for doing things differently than that, like not maintaining those standards and prioritizing being more thoughtful, right? Or being more innovative.
Yeah. And if it gets exhausting, because for me, sometimes it does as well, right? There's so many things to remember and so many things to think about, and you want to be the best person you can be.
Yeah.
It's a journey, but we are transforming to an amazing society where people can choose to be who they are and live their best selves, really represent what they feel inside, right? Where we have people who have been stomped on for years and decades and centuries saying, no, this has got to change. And where we have people coming together saying, you know what, let's dissect the way we speak and the word we use. And let's do it as part of this journey. And, it's going to be amazing to read the history books of this time.
Right.
In the future.
Yeah. I was talking to a class a couple of weeks ago, and I'd been invited to talk to them about evaluation plans and logic models and sort of how we do things. And then I brought this other bit of thinking that I've been doing about how we present data, like how we visualize data and how that might promote equity or not. And I said at the beginning of the talk, I was going to try to put these together into one presentation and make it seem cohesive, but I realized the better thing to do is just let it sit, right? Like, and show you that I don't know yet how to fit these right, these approaches into this way of working, and that's the state of the field. That's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And that's just real. So
Yes, definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, we have a lot to learn, and I
Yeah.
love that you and I are learning together. I love that leaders are learning with us, and that we also are learning from others.
Yeah. And it's going to be so interesting to see like what happens, right? I mean, as these conversations are like bubbling up, where is the field going to be, right? Where's the evaluation field going to be? Where's the philanthropy field going to be? Where's the not-for-profit industry going to be in a couple of years as a result of this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Can't wait to see.
Yep. All right. So everyone who's watching, please share your takeaways and any interesting problems that you're working on in the comments. We're really looking forward to hearing.
Yes.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Have a great weekend.